Welcome to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis bringing you a national college football show from a northern viewpoint. We've been doing this for a year, Bill, but we're doing it live in the new, fresh version of KOTN for the first time today. How you feeling about it?
I feel great about it. I'm excited about it. This has been a long ramp up, I think, to get to this point. But we've been talking about it for longer than the show has existed, probably to go almost 2 years at this point, to finally launch something like this. So, and I know it's been in your head for a while, so I'm excited for you for this to get off the ground.
I can remember saying the phrase "Kings of the North" to Urban Meyer at the 2019 Ohio State Clemson Fiesta Bowl. And the idea of, so Urban Meyer wasn't the coach anymore, but like bringing the idea of, hey, like Ohio State's been this team. They've been the best team in the North. They're sort of like the team that you send out into the world, but you know, they haven't gotten over the top, but like maybe we should acknowledge that the North and the South are a little bit different in college football. So that's 5 years. That's 5 years of talking about KOTN. And now here it is in all its glory with banners. We have banners behind us of the North. I bought 28 banners for our 28 Northern teams, but there's only spots for 14, but they're Velcroed on, so we can move them in and out. And we're going to be doing this 4 days a week, Landis, from noon to 1:30 live on YouTube. We're going to be doing a live post-game show Saturday nights at 11 p.m., and then we're going to have 3 days a week dropping pre-recorded stuff in your feeds at 5 a.m. We'll have rants on Mondays. We'll have Plant Your Flag on Wednesdays and Bets of the North, where Tyler Shoemaker and I will break down college football from a gambling standpoint in the North on Friday morning. So we're going like it's eight shows a week for us. That's a lot of us, frankly.
It's a lot of us. It won't just be us. We'll sprinkle some different people in there throughout the week, including I think starting with tomorrow's show, right? So it won't just be the two of us talking all the time. It'll be a lot of the two of us, but a lot. But you know, if you're thinking like on a Wednesday, like, man, I'm tired of hearing these two talk to each other, like there'll be some other names and faces and voices that you'll see and hear here on Kings of the North. But
probably always me. That's the
rough you are the constant. So people need to get used to a lot of Doug in their life.
And the viewership, we can watch it live on YouTube. Just
the number just goes.
Like, for instance, Dan Wetzel from the College Football Enquirer will be joining us tomorrow on the show, and we're going to have Dan on here every Tuesday as part of this. And we will have other guests moving around on the Tuesday show. We're going to have people talking about North Dakota State and West Virginia and Minnesota. But we want to introduce things here. This is what we're doing on the show today. And we just want to give a shout out to everybody who has been watching and listening so far. We've been doing this for about a year, twice a week on Kings of the North. Thanks to everybody who's been here. If you're new, thanks for trying us out. This is a national show, Bill. Like I've had trouble maybe trying to define the show because I've called it a Northern college football show. It's a national college football show from a Northern viewpoint. So we have 28 Power Conference Northern teams that we focus on. We don't talk about Georgia and Alabama and Texas and LSU every day, but we acknowledge they exist. And we occasionally, perhaps more than occasionally, will tell them to cram it when they need to be told to cram it. But what we want to do is be putting our Northern teams in the context of the whole sport and give them the attention they deserve, good and bad. But we're talking about the whole sport all the time. We're just doing it as two guys who've been covering Northern college football for a long time.
Yeah, I think people understand that a lot of the discussion about college football sort of gets pulled through a Southern/SEC lens. And we're trying to do it. We're trying to do it a little differently while still talking about the whole sport. I think the one thing that people will see that is different is Doug puts on his dog mentality hat. Get used to that, by the way, if you haven't. Last year, when we were doing this show a couple times a week, we were doing rankings, but we're only ranking Northern teams. We're going to rank the whole sport now. Like that. That's one way that I think we're going to make sure we kind of touch on everyone. But we always got an eye on what's going on down in the South and down in the SEC, even if we're not talking about them all the time.
I want to put the dog mentality hat on all the time, but then I'm worried about the bald spot that it might leave when I take it off. I have to be really careful. Yeah, we have 28 teams. We want to talk about, so what we're going to do on this show, we're going to talk about the 20 most important people in Northern college football for this year. And when I think about lists like that, I think about people who will affect the fans. if you're an average college football fan in the North, who's really going to influence the sport in a way that affects you? So yes, there are at least 2 lawyers on that list. There are conference commissioners, but I don't want to make it a commissioner AD list. There is an AD, but there's a lot of quarterbacks. There's a lot of coordinators. There's some head coaches. They're the people that like their performance will affect the ball, because we know all this other stuff exists, but we really want to talk about all the other stuff, realignment, NIL, the expanding playoff, all that as it relates to the ball. We don't want to talk about lawsuits for lawsuits' sake. Is that a fair assessment of how we want to go about this?
I think that's a fair assessment. I certainly would not be here. If you said, hey, Bill, I want to do this college football show, we're going to talk about lawsuits. You in? No.
So, lawsuit show, little bit of ball, big lawsuit. Lawyer of the week. We want to talk. We're going to have a punter of the week and a block of the week. We're not going to have a lawsuit of the week. Oh my God. Hope.
If we did lawyer of the week, we'd be getting DMs from Tom Mars, pumping up his candidacy every week. We don't need that.
It's Tom Mars again. Fine. Those guys play a role. They're all welcome to do their jobs. I may need a lawyer someday. I don't know. I don't want to like dismiss the entire legal profession. It's just a ball show. I don't know what to tell you, man. It's a ball show. Hey, Bill, what do you do for a living? Are you on a law show or a ball show?
There you go. Ball show.
28 teams. Let's run through our 28 teams for those who have been here and those who haven't been. These are the teams that we are going to focus on that are going to have banners behind me. Again, 14 spots, Velcro can peel you off. I don't know if I don't know if we can see the full gamut of things. I have 2 rows of 7. And do you want to guess? There's a little, I'm going to do the banner sometimes, Bill, that means something. Mm-hmm. The bottom row means something. Do you want to try to quickly guess why these 7 teams are on the bottom row? And Boston College is kind of the outlier. Now I'm like the weather guy. I have to figure out like, and here a front will be moving in. I have to figure out which hand to use. Especially the other 6 from Illinois, Utah, Kansas, Colorado, Minnesota, Rutgers. Why are those 6 on the bottom row?
I actually have no idea. I was thinking like teams that are like new to a conference, but that doesn't really apply to half of them. There's not like a commonality with the head coaches that I can think of off the head. So tell me why. Why are those the bottom ranked teams?
Those would be much more complicated and better. It's the Thursday games. Illinois, Utah, Kansas, Colorado, Minnesota, and Rutgers are our first Northern Power Conference teams to play. And then I put on Boston College because they play Monday, and that's a little goofy. And then Michigan State and Wisconsin are up high because they play Friday. And then I have Penn State and West Virginia next to each other because they go head to head. There's only one game this week in week 1 where our 2 Northern teams will actually be playing each other. And then Pitt, Purdue, and Washington just needed some love. Just wanted to share some love with them. So I'll try to move it around, like make everybody happy, right? So, okay, our 28 Northern teams, just so everybody knows, we got to get everybody on the same page. Mike, our great producer, here we go. Notre Dame, they're an independent. They're in Indiana. That's Northern. They're one of our teams. Then we have 3 teams from the ACC, the 3 Northern ACC teams, Syracuse, Pitt, Boston College. We were going to have Washington and Oregon be part of this discussion while the Pac-12 still existed. And then the Pac-12 exploded and they joined the Big Ten. We were going to like be ahead of the Big Ten and say, hey, we want to pull in Northern Pac-12 teams because we think there's some commonality with some Big Ten fan bases, for example. And now they're in the Big Ten anyway. So Washington and Oregon are there. Same thing with Utah. Utah was always going to be one of our teams no matter what conference they're in. So we have the 2 teams in the state of Utah, Utah and BYU. They are part of our regular discussion. Other teams, Colorado, Iowa State, Kansas, Kansas State, West Virginia, and Cincinnati. Along with Utah and BYU, those are our 8 teams from the Big 12. We're taking half the Big 12, the Northern teams in the Big 12. Then, of course, we're bringing in the former Big 10 West. It's just all the Big 10 now, but I still, when I go through the Big 10, I think about them East and West. Iowa, Minnesota, they are clearly part of this discussion. Nebraska, Wisconsin, Illinois, Northwestern. Now we move to the old Big 10 and Purdue. Now we move to the old Big 10 East, Indiana, Maryland, Rutgers, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State. Those are our 28, Landis. We originally did not have Kansas and Kansas State. We added them about a month ago because they're good, and we also have some other things. We're going to run through kind of why we did it. Are you happy with our 28?
I'm very happy with our 28. I would have been, I think, pretty bummed too going into the season had we not added Kansas and Kansas
Yeah.
State. I think they belong with us for a lot of reasons, but also they're just very good teams, very interesting teams in a super fun Big 12. So I like the 28. I also like I see some people out there on Twitter and on the YouTube asking why we don't have a couple of other schools and maybe expand that 28. And I think those are some well-reasoned arguments as well. So I'm looking forward to you laying down some latitude and snowfall on us to tell us why those are our 28.
I in the off season to prepare for this, because we weren't 5 days a week yet. I'm not writing. I did get a master's degree in latitudinal studies to help me figure out who should actually. I just went on Google. I went on Google and looked up what is latitude. So that would be fun to me. You like geography, right? Like you'd get a master's in latitudinal studies if they had it.
I actually minored in it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's show the map. This will help. And we're not gonna always have maps here, but to get us started, if you're watching on YouTube, this is the joy of watching on YouTube. We think of this as a TV show. So if you're listening on a podcast, awesome. Thank you for doing it. I hope you enjoy your run/drive. But if you're home and you want to pop on YouTube, then you can see the map. These are our plotted points of our 28 northern teams. Top half of the country, Bill, there's kind of a line there, is there not? Like you see why these 28 power conference teams are our northern teams from this map, right?
Yeah. I think we didn't reconfigure the United States.
No,
we took it as it came to us, and I think we did it right. Yeah.
No, as we say, we did not invent the North, and we did not invent college football, but we did invent Northern college football. Right? Like that's what we're doing here. Because again, as we've gone out and talked about this and explained it to people at Big 12 media days and at Big 10 media days, and we've been out to Boston College and Pitt and Cincinnati and Ohio State and Penn State and various places around the North explaining what this is. You say Northern college football and people are like, huh. And then you say, well, you know how there's Southern college football? Everybody goes, yeah. And we say, well, we want that for us. And then they're like, oh, so the map. I'd like to make a shirt of a map. Would you wear a map shirt?
I would definitely wear a map shirt. Yeah, I'll put a map behind me on the wall here if you want to.
Yeah, we'll wear. I may print this out and put this up too. The banners come down and the map goes up. Now let's plot all 68 power conference teams, and you can see who is us and who is not us. Blue on the map is North. Orange on the map is what we consider Southern teams. And then I have 6 teams that I call border/California teams. Those 6 teams are Stanford, Cal, UCLA, and USC in the state of California, and then Louisville and Virginia Tech. And those are the green plotted points. This breakdown then in the 68 power conference teams becomes 28 Northern teams, 34 Southern teams, and 6 border teams. So if you add the border to the North, which we will at times, like we're going to be friendlier to them than we are the South, you split it in half, 34-34. Does this map help you, Bill? Should this map help people visualize what we're doing here?
It does help visualize. I also, I can't help but notice Mizzou, right? Kind of on a similar plane to a couple of our other teams. But I think we know why.
I'm going to blow your mind with latitude in a second. We also know why. We also know. Well, so let's just say it now. If you want to be in the North, maybe don't join a conference that starts with the word South. You have done it to yourselves, Missouri. You chose your side, right? And so we're not going to beg you. And if you beg us, maybe if you leave the SEC someday, we'll think about it. Because we see the map. I also got a latitudinal thing for you here. But we get it. But Bill, is that not a distinction? Kansas and Kansas State, they didn't join the SEC, so we took them. How can we have a team that's in the Southeastern Conference?
We kind of have 2 because Kentucky, like Lexington, is not super far out of our reach. But yeah, no, you catch a lot with the SEC. We don't want you. Have fun.
Yeah. So the two real border teams are Louisville and Virginia Tech. And Virginia Tech is more of a snowfall average temperature play for the North. And Louisville is a little bit of snowfall latitudinal play for the North. But the thing as it is now is with those two maps, you can see we're not splitting states. So at the moment, Virginia and Kentucky and Missouri are not with us. And if we added Louisville and Virginia Tech, now we're splitting states. I'm not against that. And we are open to the idea of Louisville and Virginia Tech, but we're not there yet. And that it made it easier. We just brought in Kansas and Kansas State together. That is at least a little part of it for me.
I like that eventually Kings of the North is going to actually reconfigure the map of the United States, and we're going to have like a new Kentucky that includes Louisville, an old Kentucky that includes Lexington, and we will claim new Kentucky for the North.
For real. Yeah. We could go North Kentucky too, right? I mean, like we'll make new states. I mean, like it depends how popular we get. I think we have a chance.
West Virginia and Western Virginia. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Whatever it takes, right? So here's the other thing to help you visualize, Mike. Let's get to the third map. This is us, and this I also want to kind of see on a T-shirt, Bill.
Yeah,
These
I like
are
that.
our
cool.
northern states that we are talking about in college football. Now, this map is 30 northern states. So there are states, 19 of the 30 northern states here, we have teams in. We have power conference teams in that we're going to talk about regularly on this show. There are 11 states that don't have power conference teams that we are going to regularly talk about the show. But I want to say to Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Delaware, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, we are still your home. And we want to be on the lookout for interesting college football stories in those states. Did somebody play in 2 feet of snow? Did somebody at the FCS level or Division II or Division III or high school throw 10 touchdown passes? Did a coach make an amazing play call, right? Like we are on alert, Bill, for everything happening in the North. And again, visualize this. You see the little carve out for Missouri. You did it to yourself. This is us. This is Northern college football. You see this kind of thing with the South, right? Don't you see like SEC country carved out? If they can carve it, we can carve it. So we did a little carve out. Again, visualize when you think about this show, think about ball first. It's ball first. Mm-hmm. It's not laws first, and it's not latitudes first. But latitudes matter. And snow matters, and temperature matters, and culture matters, and everything that makes, I think, some commonality in Northern college football matters. These are our 30 states, Bill.
These are our teams. Also, shout out to Montana State. We know our brother from the North for springing that FCS over FBS upset this week.
Absolutely, even though they were favored. But yeah, that was a huge thing. And also, like we can say, I noted, for instance, that Georgia Tech is north of Florida State. So when there are two non-northern teams, maybe you lean northernmost. And certainly Nevada is north of SMU, and Nevada gave SMU all they could handle. Like we could be open to Nevada. Reno's pretty north, right? Like we're open to that. North. So like Reno's,
we're open to all these. There's snow.
Yeah. So how did we figure this out? Let's talk about latitude first, because people have been asking, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, this is.
I get a lot of questions. Like, when are you guys going to talk about latitude? I was like, just wait.
So the Mason-Dixon line was drawn at basically 39.43 degrees latitude. That's not exactly what we took. Okay, our KOTN latitudinal line is at 38.95 degrees latitude, because the Kansas campus is at 38.96 degrees latitude, and the Missouri campus is at 38.93 degrees latitude. So 0.03 degrees latitude. It might be where your stadium is, actually. I think I did it by the stadium. That's the difference. So that is we don't have anybody south of 38.95 degrees latitude. So as much as we do have some things where we're gonna, it's not a hard and fast rule. That is. So we're willing to move the line. Borders move all the time. But right now, that's the KOTN border. So if you have a question, it's like, I'm sorry, Missouri. You try to scooch up 0.03 degrees latitude, and maybe you'd be in, but also leave your conference.
Yeah, leave your conference because we're not banking on an earthquake to shift your geography to move you up a little bit. Can we get some gear? Is it 38.95? You said
Yeah.
38.95 degrees, just like on a hat, like right in the middle of the hat.
Yep.
I'd wear that.
Please keep giving merch ideas. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about average temperature. I looked at average temperature for all these campuses. 42 degrees as your average temperature in December is basically the dividing line. If you are warmer than 42 degrees average temperature in December, you're probably south. Okay. None of the 28 northern teams are warmer than 42 degrees. 4 of the 6 border schools are right on the edge. That's why they're border schools. And then there are 5 southern teams that we characterize as southern that are colder than 42 degrees. Oklahoma, Virginia, Oklahoma State, Kentucky, and Missouri. So that's like another thing. Like Missouri is the coldest of the schools we call southern, but also leave the SEC. So 42 degrees Fahrenheit in December is a dividing line. Are you okay with that?
I am okay with that. How flexible are we with the moving target there? I heard from the Farmer's Almanac it could be a pretty cold winter across the country if
we are
averages start
flexible.
dipping. Okay.
Also climate change. We have to be on our toes. So we are flexible with that, but that's a dividing line for now. The coldest, by the way, you want to guess which northern school has the coldest average December temperature?
Of our 28?
Of our 28.
Northwestern?
Minnesota, 22.1 degrees average temperature. So that's a dividing line. And then the other dividing line is snowfall. This is yearly snowfall. Do you want to guess which northern school gets the most snow per year? 127 inches average snowfall.
Is it
of our 28 schools?
Nestled in the mountains?
Syracuse.
Oh.
Very snowy. Very snowy.
Lake effect. They get the lake effect.
They do get the lake effect. So 127 inches of snowfall down to 13 inches of snowfall. That is another dividing line for us. Everybody in the north gets at least 13 inches of snow per year, except 2 teams, Washington and Oregon, because of the temperate climate on the Pacific coast. But they are so north latitudinally. Washington is the northernmost school latitudinally for us. Oregon is second. I mean, I'm not bordering Oregon and Washington because they're by the ocean and so it doesn't snow. It just rains.
Yeah.
So they're the exceptions to the rule. Everybody else gets at least 13 inches of snow.
Is it? Yeah. Well, precipitation wise, I'm sure Washington and Oregon are in lockstep with a lot of our other teams. Yeah.
We would prefer you to shovel snow to be on this show, but we get it. And then there are 2 southern schools that do get more than 13 inches of snow. Missouri gets 16 inches and Kentucky gets 14.5 inches. And then our 2 border schools, Virginia Tech gets 24 inches and Louisville gets 13 inches. So we acknowledge that it snows there. So that's like another thing in Missouri's favor. Missouri's right on the border latitudinally, and they meet the threshold from cold and snow, but they've made their choice.
Yeah.
So that snow, temperature, latitude. And then also like culture, how you think about the sport. I have manifesto is such a loaded word at this point for a variety of reasons. I mean, there's 2 people that you think of when you hear the word manifesto now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who are the people?
I don't want to say.
You can say it. You can say the Unabomber and Connor Stallions. You can say it. Yeah. It's fine. So I do have a manifesto about what we want to do on this show. And there is a lot culturally, like tailgate food and playing football in the snow or in the leaves, like in the fall. Like there's a lot of this that I think we can find a decent amount of commonality among our 28 teams. And I'm not saying you couldn't find it with Missouri and Louisville and Virginia Tech too, but like that's probably even more important than latitude, how you think about the sport. And that's what we kind of want to lean into in a lot of ways on Kings of the North.
Yeah. Does it mostly come back to how much you celebrate firing people? It's not merely that, but that feels like a big part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, unreasonable expectations. And it's not like the North is not capable of that. We certainly understand that. But there's different levels to it. And the thing that I want to emphasize is that in the North, I think like we want to beat them without being them. So we don't accept losing. But I will say at the beginning, the initial genesis of this idea is there had not been a lot of Northern teams that were the kings of college football. So we wanted to acknowledge their successes rather than having everything up here being like, well, you know, they couldn't beat Georgia, they couldn't beat Alabama, they couldn't beat LSU, they couldn't beat Florida. Like that's how you are sort of, even the best teams in the North were defined that way because there used to be things that just gave the South an advantage. Demographics, certainly having more of the good players in the South, right? Like everybody knows that. That's part of it. What would be the other thing that may have given the South an advantage in the past? What's the thing I can't think of the word, but you know what it is. Do we have to say it? We're not going to say it. But has it been the same, Bill? Has Northern college football and Southern college football have they gone about it the same way for the last 20 years?
I would say definitively not. No.
Okay. And you know what it is. You can say it in your head. We're not going to say it here, but that's an impetus for this show too. So in that world, we wanted to create somewhere where we could say, okay, it doesn't mean that you accept losing to the South, but let's acknowledge that it's not the same. It is a little harder up here. And let's celebrate the wins also as you try to do better. And then what happened? We started this show last year with the soft launch, and we got a national championship game between two Northern teams, and the North rose up. So this show in its initial creation and idea was a little bit more excuse making. There was a but in it. You know, the South's great, but the North is too, even though they can't beat the South. The but has been removed. And I think there are things happening with NIL, with the transfer portal, and just with the North again, getting it together, that I don't think the North has to take a back seat to the South anymore. So now kings of the North can be and currently are the kings of college football, thanks to Michigan and Washington. So the idea even shifted right as we started. And I think that will continue. I do not think that the North has to take a backseat to the South right now. And when I thought of this show, it was maybe going to be acknowledging a little bit that the North is in the backseat, but sometimes the backseat's cool too.
Sometimes the backseat is cool. Although I get a little car sick when I sit in the backseat. So I'm glad. I'm glad to not be there. Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy to be in the front seat. Yeah.
Car sick in the backseat. That's fair. Okay. So like, do you feel like we know who we are now, Bill? Do you know who we are? Do the people out there know who we are? We had to lay it down. Like, what is this? Why are we doing it? And like, what's the impetus for even creating this? I hope we've laid that out a little bit.
Yeah, I think we have, and I think the people who have been with us for, kind of since the launch sort of knew that. But you do make a good point that I think is worth explaining, even to those people who have kind of been there from the start. Is that this is a little bit of a different endeavor than I think we set out for, which you just laid out there. But I think it's a far more interesting conversation now to talk about whether or not King of the North can at times equal king of college football, because I totally believe that it can. We got proof of that last year, but I don't think that was a blip. I think that was the start of, I think, kind of even footing as the sport goes into a future that is like still, a little uncertain. We don't know exactly what college football is going to look like 20 years from now, but I think the North and the teams that we talk about and the best teams that we talk about are well positioned, and it's not just Ohio State, are well positioned to be a part of that conversation moving forward.
All right. Let's talk about some news. We did not have a Power Conference Northern game in week 0, but we did have a game that people watched in Ireland. And by the way, next year, the Ireland game in week 0 is Kansas State, Iowa State, which is awesome. Like, are you already anticipating that?
I've never been to Ireland. I know the folks over there like their beer. They better have a lot of it. When Iowa State fans and Kansas State fans get over there, I'm very excited for that game, because this Georgia Tech Florida State game ended up turning out to be a pretty good, compelling, exciting, important game, I think, for the season. It's not always the games that we send over there, but that one next year definitely will be.
Yeah, I think that's right. Get Bill to Ireland. We've got a year. We've got a year.
I've never been. I'd like to go.
I'm not a big beer drinker, so I want you to go. I want you because it would be a little bit, not that I wouldn't enjoy it, but some of the culture would be a little lost on me.
You can come hang out, and I'll drink for the two of us.
Yeah. I think they have Diet Coke in Ireland, right? Probably.
I'm sure they do. Yeah.
All right. Did Florida State losing affect your view of the ACC in a major way? We will make our playoff picks on Wednesday. Were you going to have Florida State in that mix?
I don't think I was going to have Florida State in that mix, but if I can combine it with the SMU Nevada game, I had said previously in our bowl prediction show that I thought SMU was going to win the ACC, and seeing Florida State lose and SMU kind of mess around a little bit with Nevada is making me rethink it sort of entirely what I think of that league in terms of who I might project in the playoff when we do our playoff picks later this week. So like I don't think it was like a earth shattering result necessarily, because I think Florida State was probably being pumped up a little too much, and maybe not enough people had paid attention to what Brent Key had done at Georgia Tech last year coming into this year. But yeah, I'm rethinking the ACC quite a bit after that weekend.
Okay. I don't think it changed me much. I've been dancing around with North Carolina State for a little bit in the ACC. I was not going to be on the Florida State bandwagon. I was all about Florida State last year. I was not this year. I do think there was some Southern, I don't know if bias is the right word. What's the word I'm looking for? It's bias. I think Florida State is probably closer to Washington than people wanted to admit. Now, they didn't lose their coaching staff, but they lost so much talent. And everybody with Washington was like, well, 6-6, 7-5. That would be great. Middle of the pack in the Big Ten. And with Florida State, it's like, they got a bunch of transfers. They'll be fine. They'll win the ACC. And it's like, why did we do that? Is it just because they're in the state of Florida? I don't know. I also think it's kind of unfair to like make fun of Florida State for being mad about going undefeated last year and getting left out of the playoff and then saying like, you lost to start this new season, because seasons are so different. But I have more of an eye on everybody who decided in voting that Florida State was a top 10 team. I heard an ESPN guy railing against preseason polls. Then we wouldn't have any context. Adding some context is good. We were able to say, hey, Florida State as a top 10 team lost. Like, you have to have context, even if it's wrong. But I think there was some Southern stuff leaking into here because like nobody's given Washington that benefit of the doubt.
No, I don't. Mike Norvell has I think benefit of the doubt is the right word. Like, and listen, the Florida State had a great year last year. I kind of think they should have made the playoff even with the injury to Jordan Travis. But I think Mike Norvell probably needs to do it more than 1 year to maybe get the benefit of the doubt that he was getting, especially if they're going to try to build their roster this way. Like, I think that's true of teams in the North and the South, right? If your plan for roster building is heavily reliant on portal every single offseason, it's not always going to hit. And it's not to say the Florida State season's over because they lost to Georgia Tech. Like, that team can gel and be much better at the end of the year than it is right now. But I do think there probably are some lessons in a team like Florida State that had such high expectations that was so reliant on the portal stumbling early in the year, because I think we'll see that happen more often than not with teams that choose to do that.
And you already saw, like, people are struggling with the reflex of how to react to an early season loss by a highly ranked team, because it does not kill their season. But here's the thing that you're allowed to do. So to be like, I think people, if you miss the idea that, I wish Florida State's whole season was over now. It's not even September. Wouldn't it be great if their season was over? Again, that was my favorite thing about college football, ruining someone's season in August. Their season's not ruined, but you do take it in and say, they're maybe not what I thought they were. Yeah. And so I think they will lose more games because of what I saw. Now, they also might get better. So the loss doesn't ruin them, but the performance can make you give up on them. So just like as you analyze it, make sure you're analyzing it the right way, college football world, and don't get stuck on the result as much as you glean the information of what the performance tells you about the future of the team. Because before it was easy to knee jerk. Man, my knees love that stuff. Somebody lost, punt, gone. Now this is happening, right? That's a big one in our family. Jack Black kicking Will Ferrell's dog off the bridge. That's a big one for us. Now this is happening. Yeah. That happens a lot. Like, whenever my kids do something that makes me mad, I pick up a fake pretend invisible dog and I say, now this is happening, and I punt it. Because Everybody wants to punt Florida State off the bridge.
Yeah.
You're not punting them off the bridge, but you're noticing that, like, oh, I'm not sure they're going to be able to throw the ball down the field with DJ Uiagalelei at quarterback.
Yeah.
Note that. That's
but
why
also,
they're not going to make the playoff, not because they're 0-1.
Yeah. But Baxter made it out of that ordeal fine. He had his triumphant moment in the end. Yeah.
I read, this is such a great analogy. You have solved the 4-team, 12-team college football playoff debate. I read that initially Baxter got punted off the bridge and he was gone. And the test audiences watched the rest of that move and they were like, what happened to the dog? I like this funny anchorman guy, but what happened to the dog? So then they had to shoehorn in this thing back at the end of the movie where Baxter's alive so people could breathe. That's what it is. If you're a 4-team playoff person, you want Baxter to die.
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? Audiences didn't like that. Audiences don't want teams punted off the bridge in August. So in the 12-team playoff, Baxter lives. Thank you, Bill Landis.
Yeah, you want Florida State to come back and negotiate with the Bear to free Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd.
I wish my technology, like, I'm getting better. I can do cutouts on Instagram now. I am not at the point where I can put up the Florida State logo on Baxter's face and make a video about it, but maybe people could. Right?
We'll get there. Yeah, we'll get there.
Florida State flying off the bridge. All right, let's talk briefly about Michigan because we're going to talk about Michigan later. But you wanted to point out to people that in our news segment, we shouldn't ignore the fact that Michigan has received its notice of allegations now from the NCAA, right?
Right. That came out on Sunday, and it seems like there's not much new in there from what had previously been reported by ESPN, but like it's real now. Like that was a draft that got leaked. This was now the official notice from the NCAA, and now things sort of get set in motion. I still do not think that really anything is imminent with that. Like sort of like it's in hand, and now that the process like starts to play out. Connor Stallion sounds like he's going to fight it. It sounds like the University of Michigan is going to fight it. Interesting that not everyone is. Jesse Minter and Denard Robinson were reported as negotiating some resolutions with the NCAA. So it's not a united front, it seems, in sort of how to handle this, which I did think was interesting and in my opinion, kind of blows up the lone wolf theory that some people have been espousing about this. But yes, it happened on Sunday. Michigan has it now, and we proceed forward to see where that goes.
So we'll talk about this more because we have something related to this in our 20 most important people in the North. UConn to the Big 12. It has been reported UConn is talking to the Big 12 about this. And the reason that this is a particular interest to us is at the moment, I like 28 as a number, right? I think it allows us to become more expert than people who are really trying to do all 68, but it's more than just the Big 10. It's more than just, your local show or podcast that you listen to about your own team. So we don't want to ignore the group of 5 teams in the North, but it's just we had to draw some lines. But if UConn joins the Big 12, we would add a power conference Northern team. What do you think about the idea of UConn maybe joining the Big 12, even though it feels like they maybe would join in other sports first if they do, and then not join in football till the next decade?
I actually don't love it. I get the appeal of UConn as a basketball entity, and I know that Brett Yormark, the Big 12 commissioner, would like to position the Big 12 as the premier basketball conference. They maybe already are, arguably. And that would certainly strengthen them to add a team like UConn with the run that UConn's on right now. But the fact that there are even like stipulations in the conversation and this potential date to add UConn, if it even happens, is like 2031.
Yeah.
It's not really a ringing endorsement from the Big 12 about the football product that UConn would bring to the table. So I think in a conference that needs to be out there, as we've talked about, with reminding people sort of just how good the ball is and how exciting that league can be, because there is going to be a lot of parity. I would not want to water that down by adding a UConn for the sake of strengthening your basketball product. So I actually kind of hope it doesn't happen.
I do maybe like the idea of this forcing UConn and giving UConn a reason to rise up and invest more in football, right? If they're going to do this, you've got to be willing to try to play with the big boys then. But it also, our friend Matt Brown at Extra Points is sponsoring a bowl game with his his endeavor this year. I would maybe like to sponsor a conference. Do you think since UConn is showing interest in something like this, they could call this conference the Big North. They could call it the Big Northeast, but they also could call it Kings of the North as a conference. We would be willing to share that name and throw in a little bit of cash if we wanted to create a Northeastern college football conference that would include Penn State, Pitt, West Virginia, Syracuse, Rutgers, Boston College, UConn, UMass, and Temple. That's 9. You have 9. You play 8 conference games. You play everybody every year. And if Cincinnati would be interested and would rather lean that way than lean towards the Big 12, we could be open to that idea as well. Now you're playing 9 conference games. UMass is joining the MAC in football next year. Like, they're interested. They're clearly, I think, in trying to get things going a little bit more. The main thing here is Penn State leaving the Big 10 as a tent pole. Like, you need to have a major, and I think you could throw them a little bit more money. You don't divide the money evenly. I think a conference like this could actually be attractive. I know back in the day, like, this was like kind of this thing that was always out there. I think Pitt and West Virginia would love to be in a conference together in football again. I think Boston College and Syracuse would be all in on this. Rutgers had been waiting to get into Big 10 for a while. Greg Schiano said he told us he always wanted that. But I don't know about their interest here. But when I see like a team like UConn being like, we want to step up, I'm like, then let's do your own thing. KOTN as a conference. What do you think?
I think you'd have a hard time convincing those teams in the Big 10 to turn down their $80 million check or more than that probably in the future. And also their place in a league that is going to have multiple playoff bids to go to a league that will probably just have one if it has any at all.
Let's see where Penn State and Rutgers are. Like, if you could do a thing where, what if you said to Penn State, we guarantee you that your share of our money each year is the equivalent. We will make it equivalent to whatever your Big 10 share would have been. And then we'll all divide the rest. Right. And again, for Rutgers, like, I don't know. I think it'd be fun. Like, I think it could be attractive. I actually think you could sell that conference in a way. So I don't know. We'll see. It's not going to happen. But I just want to name a conference. Desmond Howard. I ranted about this on Twitter because there was a discussion on ESPN. Desmond Howard happened to be the person having it of like, who would replace Ryan Day at Ohio State? And he said Chip Kelly. And just like the idea that like, hey, let's be on ESPN before Ohio State, which is ranked number 2 in the preseason and is loaded for bear this year. Let's have a conversation of who would replace their coach if they don't reach all their goals. Those are the kind of discussions. And I know people might think it's because I cover Ohio State. I certainly know Ryan Day better than I know a lot of other coaches. It's not that. It's the media. Most of what I get mad at is getting mad at the media for the way they handle this sport. Why is that anybody's discussion? And then, by the way, Chip Kelly is not here to replace Ryan Day. He's here to support Ryan Day so Ryan Day can succeed. The idea that Chip would be in here and be like, oh, yeah, my mentee, the guy that like we're joined at the hip. Yeah, let's kick him out the door. I'll take this job is just a ridiculous conversation. But my point when I was ranting on Twitter, and a lot of people I think liked it, partly because they thought it was anti-Desmond Howard. It's not. It's anti anybody having that conversation about any team. Hey, it's a really good team. Hey, high achieving person who's had a couple missteps in the past, but, has made some changes to give yourself a better chance to win this year. This is really interesting. I have a question for you. What if you fail? That part of any sports conversation. And I think it is the Baylessization. It is the ESPNification. It is the jerkification of college football. And that it's the trollification that gets attention. People think it's fun. People think it's interesting. And it actually just makes everybody miserable. So my rant is not against Desmond Howard. It's against everybody, especially this sport, which has so many levels to it. It's national and regional simultaneously. It's 130 plus teams trying to fight each other. Why do we insist on doing this? I don't want this show to be that, because it happens too much, too many other places. And that discussion in general, Landis, drives me absolutely nuts.
I think it's just easy, right? I think that's why it's so prolific. Like, it doesn't have to be grounded in fact or logic either, because to piggyback off what you said, tossing out Chip Kelly's name as a potential replacement for Ryan Day when Chip Kelly just left UCLA because he didn't like all the stuff he had to do there as a head coach. He's going to come to Ohio State and do it now? Ohio, like
Yeah.
he's going to go. No, it's ludicrous. But they're easy conversations to have. I actually do wonder. I mean, people must like it because like that's like it's propping up ESPN, those conversations. But yeah, we're not going to do it here. I don't want to have those conversations. Like
No.
if Ryan Day does have the season or has a season different from the season he needs to have, like we're going to talk about it. We're going to analyze it as it's happening. We're just not going to have August conversations about what if this guy, loses X amount of games and loses his job kind of stuff. I just don't find that very interesting. I'd rather talk about the ball and what is happening than kind of, pontificate on things that may or may not happen.
Yeah. And listen, I get like hot seat lists and all that kind of thing. Like when you kind of brush over those things, like that's very common. Everybody does that kind of stuff. But to have it be like a primary conversation about any particular team, that again, like everybody immediately jumps from like not meeting expectations to firing people. It just,
I think it's fine to set expectations, right? I think that have reasoned conversation about what expectations should be is one thing. It's then to go down the road of hypotheticals after that I find kind of wholly uninteresting.
Yeah. And like let's assume the negative. So now, assuming the negative happens, what's the next step? Like that's why is that your conversation? All right. Last one thing we want to talk about. One more thing is another kind of like journalism thing. Is with Colorado, Deion Sanders and the University of Colorado football team saying that they will not take questions from Sean Keeler, a columnist for the Denver Post, because as they label it, they feel like there have been personal attacks, which I think is not the right phrasing there, and so they aren't going to talk to him. He can still cover games. People are like, should we have Sean Keeler on the show? I went to college with Sean Keeler. I know Sean Keeler. I always joke, I applied for a job one time, and Sean Keeler and I actually have a decent amount in common. He's from Iowa. My wife is from Iowa. We went to the same college. We're very similar in a lot of ways. And I applied for a job, and he got it. And I always say that that's like one of those things where an employer saying, you know what? You are the exact type of person we are looking for, but not you. Someone just like you, except not you, is what we want. And when he got that job that I applied for, I was like, okay, well, like I checked every box except the one that was hire this version of this guy. So I know Sean Keeler, swell fella. I don't think you should go around like, whatever, banning the media. And I would say this to Sean, and I've done it before, and it's a journalism lesson in the midst of a football show. We're not laws. We're not latitudes. We're occasionally journalism lessons. Being glib doesn't do you any favors. And I have found this in my own career. Sometimes you were trying to turn a phrase and be like Jim Murray was back in the old days. I think Jim Murray, like maybe the greatest sports journalist ever, he always went after like cities. Cities don't have a heartbeat. Like cities are like a conglomeration. A city can't take something personally. I think there maybe was some glibness in the phrasing of things that, which maybe was part of columns that were absolutely reasonable criticisms, and nobody's expecting anybody to be a cheerleader. But I think it cuts your legs out a little bit from the argument you're making. And I'm not defending Colorado for doing this, but I do think when all of us are doing this, being glib with like a nickname you give somebody or calling somebody something, they are people, and they usually react to that much more strongly and in a worse way than they react to like, I don't like your actions. I don't like your decisions. I don't think you're doing your job well. And I think there's a little bit of that at play here, which I think is at least worth acknowledging in some way, even though I don't think Colorado should be in that business. And I think Sean Keeler is good at his job.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the middle on it too. It sounds to me maybe like you are as well. Like I don't ever want to see like a program kind of shut out media because they deem them as like unfriendly or whatever. And I do think like Deion has come off appearing as like a bit thin-skinned through this ordeal. And in the process of it happening too, there was some stuff about there's language in his contract about only talking to quote mutually agreed upon media, which I have never seen. I've never seen that in anyone's contract before. And it doesn't exist in any other Colorado coach's contract. So like if Deion wants to live in a world where people only ever say good things about him, maybe he shouldn't be a major college football coach. I understand that the personal attack piece of it. I probably would give Sean Keeler, I don't know him at all, similar advice to what you just laid out there. But I hope that this is not a like regular thing with Deion Sanders, because it distracts from his program too, right? Like
It
Colorado's
does.
got a chance to be a interesting, good football team this year, and I would hate for the conversation to be about Deion and his war with the media when it should be about the team.
I certainly, when I was doing working at Cleveland.com and being a columnist there, I started doing a decent amount with the Browns when they were terrible, with Hugh Jackson as the head coach. And I asked Hugh Jackson a lot of confrontational, negative questions in press conferences, and he thought I was getting personal. And I sort of thought, like, how would I be getting personal? Like, I don't know you personally. I'm talking about the way that you were performing your job. And we did have a meeting with me and Hugh Jackson and the communications director for the Browns, and we sort of talked things out. And I don't know exactly what happened. Like, I think that's better for coaches. Like, here's the thing about this too. When you are in this business and you are criticizing people, you are absolutely open to being criticized back. Kirk Ferentz
100%.
criticized me for the questions that I asked in a news conference when I was confrontational and negative with Kirk Ferentz. That is totally fair. And so, like, the part of this, like, that he still can do, he still can go to the games. They're not banning him. Like, but we're open for criticism because we do stuff wrong too. And I'm not saying Sean did something right or wrong here. I'm just saying we have to be able to take that. And sometimes people in this business get automatically offended. We rip people all the time. And as soon as one of them rips us, we're like, how dare you? It's like, how dare you? That's how I make my living, is ripping other people. So it's not a how dare you. I just wish maybe Colorado and Deion would have like had a meeting with Sean and expressed their concerns, aired their grievances, even air them publicly then, but try to talk through it before you get to like, we're not taking questions from you anymore. So anyway, it was a big talking point. And like you said, I'm really interested to watch Colorado football this year. I'm not sure what's going to happen, and I think Deion has done some good stuff there, and I think he has done some questionable stuff there, but it's hard. And I think maybe on both sides here, like, you're getting your own way a little bit, like good intentions, professional at your job. But I think maybe both here, you get a little bit in your own way. And if you can just check yourself before you wreck yourself, everybody can be a little happier.
Yep. Do you want to hit on Pitt real quick before we go to break?
What happened? What happened, Pitt? Oh,
so Pat Narduzzi,
Mike, our producer, Johnny on the spot with the breaking news.
Pat Narduzzi said in his media availability today that both Nate Yarnell and Eli Holstein are going to play against Kent State. Who starts will be determined this week in practice, but his plan right now is to play both of them in the season opener.
I was at Pitt practice last week. They're different quarterbacks, but they really, I think, want a guy who can get the ball out in this new Cade Bell offense. And this makes me even more fired up for the fact that I'm going to Pitt at Cincinnati in week 2, because they have a time here to try to figure this out a little bit in week 1. I don't think you want to be in figure out mode for week 2. Now, deciding to play 2 can be a decision. So they might come out of week 1 and say, our decision is play 2, but I don't know that they can be like still wondering about their quarterback situation. We liked Eli Holstein in the spring. I know Nate Yarnell put in good work there, and they really had a lot of faith in him. So they didn't throw away their own guy to go right to the transfer, but they also didn't close the door on the transfer just because they liked their own guy. So I actually kind of like the way Pitt is handling this so far.
I don't mind it for the opener that they have. I think if they were playing Cincinnati in the opener, or if they were playing the backyard brawl in the opener, Pat Narduzzi would probably pick one. Playing Kent State affords you the opportunity to let this play out a little more. But the fact that Nate Yarnell was named the starter in the spring, and then Pat Narduzzi kind of backed off of it going into camp, and then today he says that Eli Holstein, quote, has caught up to Nate Yarnell, that says to me that if Eli Holstein has caught up, he will soon pass him. So I'm anticipating that Eli Holstein will be this team's long-term starting quarterback.
Bama transfer, borderline 5-star recruit, just kind of got swept aside and all the changes there and all the talent at Alabama. Like, that is a great get for Pitt. Sometimes it's too, like, when you go out and get the talent, can't be afraid to play it. So I'm very curious to watch this play out for Pitt. Okay, when we come back, we're going to take a little break. When we come back, we will run through the 20 most important people in Northern college football this season and the 5 Southern villains who might get in the way for the North this year. We'll do all of that next on our first live show in the new world of Kings of the North. We are back on Kings of the North. Just want to make sure, again, we shout out our producer, Mike Urstowski, and also some great help from our friend Jeremy Birmingham, and just helping us get this look down, get everything ready for this. This is quite an undertaking. We are not part of a gigantic, larger network, Bill. We are not part of On3 or Rivals or 24/7 or The Athletic or, a lot of times when a show like this would launch, you have that backbone of a company that has done this before behind you. And we are lean and mean, and we are happy about that. But we're kind of doing this from scratch, and we had to go. We have incredible support at the very top here on Kings of the North. And then we have kind of just done this feeling our way. And so Mike has done a great job, and I'm super excited about where we are. But some of it's like not that easy, bro.
It's not that easy to produce a daily live, what is effectively a 90-minute to 2 hours, although this one feels like it's going to go past 90 minutes, show about college football. So yeah, a lot of thought and planning went into this. So shout out to Mike and everyone else who helped us.
All right, let's get to our 20 most important people in Northern college football. I've been messing around with this idea for a long time. When I was at Cleveland.com, I always wanted to do this for like the city of Cleveland. I always call that the most influential list. I just went with important this time. Like influential kind of is what I mean. It's like it's just affecting you. It's not really behind the scenes, in front of the scenes. That you, the average college football fan, hey, what's really going to matter? Who's going to matter? And it's not the best. It's not the best. It's trying to find the people who their performance, what they do has a chance. Maybe there's a range of performance there. Maybe their job is so important that they are going to be the person who drives their program. Like that. That's sort of what this should be, Bill. It's not best. It's not. It's influence. Does this do we understand kind of where we're trying to come at this?
Yeah, I think so. After we go through the 20, I have a couple of names I want to throw at you to see if maybe they meet that threshold. Because influence is a strong word, right? I think there's some people that I had in mind that maybe don't quite rise to the level, but I think are incredibly important to teams in the North, not only for this year, but sort of long term. But yeah, I think who is pushing the program forward the most, or pushing forward, I don't know, an agenda of some kind that might impact our teams the most, I think is the right way to view it.
I will say this, had we done this list last year, I think no doubt about it, Jim Harbaugh would have been number one. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. Yeah.
And I think JJ McCarthy might have also been in our top 5 or 10. That there were such two people who were like the pivot point for that. I do think, I will tell you, Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner, is going to be on this list. He might have been higher a year ago. Brian Ferentz, 1,000% would have been on this list. I think he might have been number 2 a year ago because there was such attention on that. And Iowa was so good. And as it turned out, I think like a postseason list of Northern football, who had the most influence, I think Jim Harbaugh's number 1. Michael Penix is probably number 2. For like a postseason list. But I think Brian Ferentz is up there because that was a gigantic national story that affected Northern football. Everybody was talking about it.
It was a huge Northern story, but I guess maybe I would argue, like, how much did it actually change the trajectory of Iowa's season?
Well, but I would say, I think it influenced Northern fans because it was something that people were talking about. You were like, you as a Northern fan, what did you know about last year? You knew Michigan was good. You knew Washington was good, and you knew this Iowa guy's kid was maybe going to get fired. Like that, like from that perspective, it didn't affect, I don't know that it affected the trajectory of their season, but it was a gigantic talking point in major college football. And then they made a move in the middle of the year. So like that's like it influenced your view of Northern college football. Okay.
It did. Only one of those people got their own dedicated segment from us and from a lot of other shows every week until he was fired. Yeah.
That is correct. Like that matters. So that's what this list should be. 20 people who might get dedicated segments on Kings of the North this year. This is 20-1. We'll run through it kind of quick. Number 20, I just have this as the Northwestern Stadium people. And this is the people like making the decisions around this is actually kind of interesting because like Derek Gregg, the guy who's the AD there right now, like has kind of been like moved out of the AD spot and into another role. So it's whoever's pulling the strings to make all this happen. And it's twofold. One is Northwestern's doing this interesting thing where they're building a temporary 15,000 seat stadium at the edge of campus right next to the lake for the next 2 years to play college football there because they are in the midst of constructing a new 35,000 seat privately funded stadium where they used to have Ryan Field. Northwestern last year drew fewer than 21,000 fans per game at home. They were 93rd in the nation in attendance, but they are going about this a different way. This is going to be 12,000 fewer seats than the old place. This is why I have it on the list, Bill. I'm curious to see how this goes with the temporary stadium and the new stadium that's going to open in 2026. And I wonder how many other people in college football are paying attention. That they go smaller, they go a little more high tech. You kind of create demand potentially. There aren't many major power conference schools with its attendance as low as Northwestern. So maybe this doesn't apply across the board, but there are a lot of places with kind of old stadiums. And I think people are afraid to like pull the trigger on doing something new. If this really works, I'm curious what the effect might be.
I think it could be a replicable model for some teams. Small, like, yeah, I know like Kansas is doing some stuff to its stadium, right? Like, and maybe Kansas maybe can reliably assume that they'll have bigger crowds than even Northwestern had. But I actually like the play here. Like, I find it to be like forward thinking. If there's anybody who thinks it's like a joke that Northwestern is playing in a temporary 15,000 seat stadium, you must have not gone to Ryan Field to see a game recently, because that was a rough place to play college football. So like, I like this. I like that they're kind of being or thinking outside of the box for a temporary solution. And I think their new stadium is going to be very cool for everything that I've seen. So I would almost rather have what Northwestern is doing, and maybe it's specifically for Northwestern, than to just say, oh, we'll play all of our games in Soldier Field and have a NFL stadium that is a third of the way full and just doesn't feel like a college football game. Like, I think I'm excited to see what this looks like.
And if it goes well with the temporary thing, maybe it'll make teams more willing to, do a redo on their current stadium and have a couple, like Illinois did it many moons ago and wound up playing, I think, in Soldier Field for a season. As you said, Kansas is doing it right now. It's only a 1-year thing from Kansas. They're going to play in Kansas City at Arrowhead Stadium at the soccer and all at the soccer field there. So I just like keep an eye on that because it's a little innovative. Northwestern can do it because their crowds are so low and there's not like a great like stadium tradition there. Keep your eye on it. Number 19, I lumped these together because I've been talking about them together for so long. Since Bill O'Brien got hired at Boston College, Bill O'Brien and Greg Schiano, former NFL head coaches who are trying to build something. Schiano has done it. He's done it for a second time at Rutgers. Bill O'Brien in year 1 at Boston College. I just think these are guys who are great fits for these schools, Bill, and have a chance to really build something that would really like sort of reshape Northeastern college football.
I think they could. I was not there initially with Bill O'Brien. The interview that you did with him on Kings of the North, which I would suggest people maybe go back and watch, it's from a few months ago, I think, or right around the time of right around the beginning of spring ball, maybe like February, early March. It was really enlightening for me because I was not sure that Bill O'Brien, I guess, felt the same way about Boston College as like I know Greg Schiano feels about Rutgers.
Yeah.
But I think that Bill O'Brien does. I don't know that Bill O'Brien is looking at this job at BC as just a stopgap to another NFL job or another coordinator job somewhere. It's a tough job. Like I think he knows that, but I found him to be, or to come off as like fully invested in building BC back up. And listen, like they went to a bowl game last year, right? It's not like he's taken over a dormant program. Like they're the bones of that thing are usable. Like I think he could get BC to another level than sort of just like a perennial kind of 500 team rather quickly, because I think he believes in the vision that a lot of people I think probably had for BC as a program, but no one's really been able to kind of institute lately.
Yeah, I agree. And also, like, I didn't do the complete list, but former NFL head coaches currently coaching in college football: O'Brien, Schiano, Matt Rule at Nebraska, Chip Kelly, offensive coordinator at Ohio State, Bobby Petrino, offensive coordinator at Arkansas. But like, there's a lot of them are in the North, right? We'll take them. You don't make it in the NFL. You want to come coach in Northern college football? We'll take you. I find it hard to believe, but just having been at Pitt and they share a practice facility with the Pittsburgh Steelers and just like kind of talking to some people and hearing some other conversation about Mike Tomlin, I just still I always assume that people think Mike Tomlin is one of the best coaches in the NFL, but the Steelers haven't won a playoff game in a while and they're in a goofy quarterback situation this year. He remains maybe number one on my list. If for some reason it got goofy with the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Northern college football team that could persuade Mike Tomlin to come to college, holy moly, Landis. I'm totally in. It's always going to be in the back of my mind.
Yeah, me too. And I think we've talked about that before, and Mike Tomlin is not as old as you think he is.
Nope.
He got that job with the Steelers pretty young. He's only 52. So
plenty of time.
If he's out of that job in Pittsburgh at any point, like in the next 3-4 years, he's still got some time to maybe dip his toe in the college if he wants to.
Yeah. All right. Number 17, lawyer talk, just a scooch. Jeffrey Kessler and Steve Berman, who are like the lead attorneys in the House versus NCAA lawsuit and now settlement. All this stuff is changing college football. All this stuff that's happening in college football with paying players is happening because of lawsuits. And these are the guys at the front of it. And that might be enough lawyer talk for me. 17th on the list. It's behind the scenes. Anybody watching this, you don't have to pay attention to it, but it is affecting you in some way.
Yeah, I have no lawyer talk for you. I think we did skip 18.
No, Aiden Childs was 18.
Yeah, we didn't talk about him.
Oh, I talked about him in my own head. For real? We didn't do that on the show.
You're always talking about Aiden Childs in your head, but we didn't talk about him.
We seriously did not talk about Aiden Childs on the show.
No,
I literally had a 45-second Aiden Childs hit in my own head. Well, like you were making your Bill O'Brien point. I was like, yeah, no, I get it. Bill O'Brien. Let me think about Aiden Childs. This is what we're going to say. And then I skipped it straight on the show. Yeah. Do you do that? The conversations that we've talked about this before. I have fights that I want a verbal confrontation to happen with somebody out in the world. And I imagine it in my own head. And then it just like passes by and is nothing. And I'm like, I would have been ready. Oh, man.
Yeah, it happens to me all the time. Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm ready for it. We got to talk about Doug having conversations in his own head during the live show.
We just get a mic in there, put a microphone in your head. We'll be good to go.
It's like one of those meetings. You guys had a meeting without Doug? Oh, you had a meeting without me? What? Why didn't you invite me? It was the in your own head meeting. 18 is Aiden Childs from Michigan State. Has a chance to be a 3-year starter in the North. And when we did our Leap Day predictions, I believe it was on Leap Day 2024, thinking about 2028, you were in on Aiden Childs, at the very least, Heisman finalist, right? If not Heisman winner.
I was Heisman finalist. Yeah. Aiden Childs to New York. Aiden Childs, by the way, you see him last week? What he said? Yeah.
Yeah. Take chesty. The over.
Little chesty. We'll see.
Like, did you want to run up there and hug him? Like a chesty, skilled Northern quarterback? Have your prayers been answered?
I like it. I think there's reason to be somewhat excited about Aiden Childs and what he has around him, but Michigan State's got an uphill battle, I think, but I like a confident quarterback.
20 Northwestern Stadium people, 19 Greg Schiano / Bill O'Brien, 18 Aiden Childs, 17 the lawyer guys. Okay. Reset Doug's head. 16 Jamie Pollard, the Iowa State AD. He's been named like the AD of the year. He's one of the top 5 longest tenured power conference ADs. I think he's been at Iowa State for 18 years. He's raised a bunch of money. They're good at everything. And the reason I put on a guy like this, like for instance, like I didn't put a ton of ADs here because there are going to be ADs behind the scenes who are working through how to distribute direct payment money, how to distribute the revenue sharing across different sports. Every AD is going to have their own decision-making about which sports do we want to, support the most, which might really be pulled back from in terms of scholarships. Like every AD has those decisions. So I could put a guy like Ross Bjork, the new Ohio State AD on here. I could put Ward Manuel, the Michigan AD on here. Like there's plenty of big time ADs you can talk about here. Pat Chun, the new AD at Washington. But I went with a guy at like a smaller school who's trying to figure it out because it's just harder there, right? It's just a more difficult conversation. And I think Iowa State's success from football to men's basketball to women's basketball across the board has been remarkable. And I do think as a result, like a guy like Jamie Pollard, as they try to figure it out at Iowa State, like watch them because they're going to represent maybe more schools and trying to figure this out than like what the AD at Ohio State does.
Yeah, right. It's no offense to Ross Bjork or Ward Manuel. I think their path is a little more navigable with all the money that those programs bring in, and there are going to be hard decisions to be made at both those places. I'm not trying to undersell that, but yeah, I think I like Iowa State as a stand-in for kind of like the average college football program, and Jamie Pollard as a sharp guy, as the AD trying to steer his program and maybe lay a blueprint for some others to get through that.
15 is Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner. In a lot of ways, Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, and Tony Petitti are driving the bus about where college football is headed. But the reason I don't have Tony Petitti higher is because the Big Ten has its TV deal. They are in year 2 of a 7-year, $8 million TV deal that runs through the 2029 season. They just added 4 teams this year. I kind of don't know what else there is to do. So behind the scenes, like they are shaping the forward path. And are we going to break off the top 30 teams? Or all? I get it. People love to talk about that stuff. But the Big Ten's pretty set. We know what the Big Ten is right now. So the Big Ten commissioner is always going to matter. But 2 years ago, when realignment and the TV deal and that kind of stuff was being decided, I think you could have made a case to put the Big Ten commissioner number 1 on this list, and they're 15th because that stuff got done.
Yeah, I think this is right. I think he should still be on the list, but I do think you're right about a lot of that hay kind of already being in the barn. The one thing that is like still out there and will always be out there for the Big Ten is, until something happens, is Notre Dame. So what is Tony Petitti going to do relative to Notre Dame as people keep trying to find their lifeboat, and whether or not Notre Dame wants a lifeboat or they're cool out there on their own boat?
I always enjoy that conversation. It does just feel like maybe Notre Dame has found its island with TV, with the way Notre Dame's going to work in the 12-team playoff, and that they just might be settled enough that that's not a front of mind conversation. 14 is Fran Brown at Syracuse. We like a lot of the new coaches in the North. The reason I have Fran Brown here is he is a great example to me of Northern roots, Jersey guy, goes to Georgia as a position coach because he had been so successful, gets some seasoning there, and then comes back north. And this is a great hire by Syracuse. It's a great opportunity for Fran Brown, because what happens too often is there are guys from the North who end up getting hired in the South and are gone. Right? Because the South loves some Northern seasoning on their coaches, right? We want to talk about culture. What's a good Northern seasoning? Like if you're grilling in the tailgate, what's a good Northern seasoning that you could put on like a piece of meat, Landis?
I don't know, like a paprika. Does that count?
Like a paprika, like nice paprika. And then the South is like, oh, we like paprika, and they want to take our guys. So this is Syracuse. Like, okay, we're acknowledging Georgia knows how to play football. Fran Brown did a great job there. Let's get him north. Let's hire him early. Hadn't been great. Get him up here, and I think has a chance to be again like show the way a little bit of let's see more Northern schools hire guys like Fran Brown of the North, son of the North, some Southern seasoning, and then get him back up here.
Yeah, I like that plan. And I think Fran Brown needs to be here too when you're starting to wonder about Northern programs that could be on the rise, right? And I think there are a few, but of the programs, I'm trying to just think quickly, of the Northern programs that have hired new people, maybe it feels like maybe Fran Brown and Syracuse might have the best chance of making a substantial jump to being something they have not been previously, which is exciting.
Right. Maybe they jump to winning the ACC and cashing my 60-1 $2 bet. Just say it. Lance Leipold, 13th at Kansas. Why do I have him on this list, Bill?
Because he's like maybe the best coach in college football.
Okay. Works for me. Works for you. Like if I didn't have him on the list, you'd be mad, right?
Yeah, no, he has to be here. I mean, what he's done at Kansas is remarkable. We talked about it when we added the two schools, but I'm also kind of infatuated with the idea of Lance Leipold becoming Kansas's Bill Snyder too, which I think he absolutely would be. And he, like I said, he knows how to build a winning program, especially maybe almost exclusively, I guess, at places that are out resourced relative to their competition. So I think as long as he is there, Kansas will be relevant.
And they got through a cycle where his probably two greatest ties to other power conference schools would be Wisconsin and Nebraska. And Kansas got through that cycle where Matt Rule and Luke Fickell got hired. Lance Leipold stayed at Kansas. They were able to keep him. And now I think you can maybe lock in for the long term. He had to be on the list. 12 is Garrett Green, the West Virginia quarterback. For anybody who has watched over the last year, I'm not sure we have to explain why Garrett Green is here, but this is a high ceiling dude that is going to be the engine of whether West Virginia can make a dark horse run to the playoff. So, I mean, you knew I was putting him on.
Had to be on here. We had to stick to our guns there. Like we can't talk about him as much as we have and then not have him on here. Because we talk about him like he's Dan Marino. So we might as well, or maybe Steve Young. Maybe Steve Young is a better comparison. To have him on here. Really high ceiling. I think really fun quarterback too. Like a guy that you can flip on your TV every Saturday, and I think probably enjoy watching the way he plays a position.
Yeah, we'll be there on Saturday. West Virginia hosting Penn State. Number 11, Morgan Scalley, the Utah defensive coordinator. The reason I picked him, like I think, if Cam Rising stays healthy, if Brant Keithy stays healthy, Kyle Whittingham, you know what he's going to do. Morgan Scalley has been named like the coach in waiting behind Kyle Whittingham. He's been there for 10 plus years as a defensive coordinator. Their defense is always good, but this is a little two-pronged of, there was this era 10, 12, 15 years ago when coach in waiting was like a big new thing, and it almost always went sideways. It always got like loose. Will Muschamp was the coach in waiting at Texas and then left to become the head coach at Florida, right? So I don't think this is going to be any kind of negative thing for Utah, but the fact that they need to have a great defense, they always do. They need to keep doing that. And also, he's taken over. This dude super matters. That's why I put him on the list.
Yeah, I think maybe I would have perhaps had him higher than 11.
Oh, good.
Because of what he means to the future of Utah football now, right? It's among the more reliable programs in college football, like on the short list of most reliable programs in college football under Kyle Whittingham. And like to take that over is no small deal. So a lot of eyeballs are going to be on Morgan Scalley and whether or not he's able to actually carry that forward in a way that keeps Utah from losing any kind of footing it has, because it's not merely a reliable program. And I get like it had won the Pac-12 a couple of times under Kyle Whittingham, but it is now in a league where it could be positioned more often than not as kind of like the big dog in that league if everything goes right. So he's in a tough spot. Not to say he can't handle it, but he's in a tough spot.
That's a good point too. Like changing leagues also, like you have a whole new group of teams to scheme for. Like it's a whole new world that like it really, you've been good and consistent, but now you have to be good and consistent when your whole world changes. All right. Top 10. Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame coach at 10. Notre Dame has to have somebody represented on this list. It could have been like Mike Denbrock, the new offensive coordinator. Could have been Riley Leonard, the new quarterback. Could have done something with the tackles that they lost their two starting tackles from last year. And Charles Jagusaw, the guy they thought was going to take over at left tackle, to injury. But Marcus Freeman, I guess he's the obvious one. Is he the right Notre Dame guy on this list?
I maybe would have lobbied for Riley Leonard only because it feels like the key to Notre Dame taking the next step this season is better quarterback play, like dynamic quarterback play, championship level quarterback play. And I think that Riley Leonard has that kind of ceiling if Mike Denbrock can get it out of him. But Marcus Freeman, I think, also plays too, right? Like, especially if you think about it more long term. There was always that thought that Marcus Freeman gets hired, he was going to elevate Notre Dame's ceiling, which is already pretty high, right? Under Brian Kelly. It's not like they were going 8-4 every year. They were in the playoff and Brian Kelly took the program to a national title game. So he was expected to do something greater than that. And hasn't quite done it yet. But I think you can talk yourself into maybe Notre Dame being on the right trajectory. It just means that Marcus Freeman's going to have a lot of eyeballs on him as he tries to accomplish that goal.
Number 9, Brett Yormark, the Big 12 commissioner. He's higher than Petiti because I think the Big 12 is in more flux. They're still talking about adding new members. They've got to find a foothold here. They're going to be aggressive in marketing themselves and looking for new ideas. So I think the Big 10, as we said, is more established and more settled right now. The Big 12 could go a lot of different directions. I think they're in a good spot, but that's why I have Yormark higher than Petiti.
I think it's right to have him higher than Petiti. The league that does still feel maybe the most in flux of the big leagues. I don't know. The ACC is funky, got its own stuff going on. But Brett Yormark too is pretty aggressive in, I I think exploring new avenues too is probably the right way to put it. So I could see him as being a guy who maybe pulls some of the other leagues out of their comfort zone because he does some stuff that maybe they hadn't thought about doing previously.
Yeah. Number 8 is the NCAA Committee on Infractions as it relates to Michigan. They have dropped the notice of allegations, and Michigan has 90 days to respond, which basically means they don't have to respond until the regular season is over. Now, there could be a negotiated settlement along the way. They could just make a ruling on it. The reason I have this for Michigan, again, Michigan needs to be represented on a list like this. Of course, Alex Orji matters. Of course, Sharon Moore as the new head coach matters. Of course, Wink Martindale as the new defensive coordinator matters. Of course, Mason Graham and Will Johnson as two of the 5 best defensive players in college football matter. But it's the thing, we've talked about it before on this show. How much might this hover? I don't know. And the football really matters to Michigan this year. I think they're going to play good football. They have a couple things they got to figure out. But whether this can affect them, even if it's not front of mind because now it's been dropped, it's a little weird. And I just want to make a list of 20 head coaches and quarterbacks, but I am curious about if this has any effect on the ball.
I think it could. I might have this higher too. I mean, okay. I don't want it to be right. I would like coaches and quarterbacks and players to be higher up on this list, but I think this is pretty important. What's going to happen here? Because I still don't have a tremendous feel for what exactly comes out of this. I think it could linger in a way that negatively impacts Michigan on the field this year, and then obviously have longer standing implications for Michigan down the road, depending on what happens. So this matters greatly what they decide they're going to do. So yeah, I think it's right to have it here. And I might have put it in the top 5 if I'm being honest.
Okay.
Because of how important it is.
Number 7 and number 6, we can do together a little bit. We've lumped these guys together a little bit. Number 7 is Avery Johnson, the second-year quarterback at Kansas State, first-year starter. Number 6 is Dylan Raiola, the first-year quarterback, first-year starter at Nebraska. Young ballers at quarterback that have a chance to elevate really good programs that kind of are built behind tough head coaches and normally good defense and don't often have quarterbacks with these skill sets, Landis. Raiola's more of a long-term play. Avery Johnson, I think, is a play of can he get Kansas State in the playoff this year? But I don't think you're surprised either of these two guys are in our top 10.
No, they're program elevators or potential program elevators, right? So I think they both belong here. I think it's right to have Raiola above Johnson because Kansas State has kind of like already been good under Chris Kleiman, and people already have the championship expectations in the Big 12 for Kansas State this year. Like Dylan Raiola at Nebraska is just a different animal. Like if this thing hits, like Nebraska will be sort of what it's wanted to be kind of since it got to the Big Ten, right? Like, which is just relevant in the conference, relevant nationally, the kind of team that people are going to want to watch every weekend. And it'll be because of the kid they have playing quarterback for the next 3 years. So he's a massive, massive presence in the North, but in college football at large.
Our producer Mike is telling us the Big Ten just announced their tiebreaker procedures for this year. So we will get to that before the end of this show. Number 5, as we move into the top 5, is Tim Lester taking over for Brian Ferentz as the Iowa offensive coordinator. Just to refresh, we like to use Brian Fremo's efficiency ratings as a way to judge offenses and defenses rather than raw stats. This is Iowa's offensive ranking in the 7 years that Brian Ferentz was the offensive coordinator at Iowa. 121, 92, 88, 57, 53, 44, 35. So his first, they literally got worse every single year. That was in reverse order. So in 2017, they were the 35th best offense. When they went 44, 53, 57, 88, 92, 121, falling off a cliff the last 3 years. If Iowa has a top 50 offense, which somebody might say, like, that's impossible. Well, they did in 2018. They almost did in 2020. Just be competent, and I think you have a chance to have Iowa at the edge of the playoff race, which is why I have them here.
I think so, too. I also think it's probably worth pointing out some personnel stuff to like 2017 Iowa. That's a rostered NFL quarterback and a couple of like pretty high-level NFL tight ends, right? So there's a personnel piece of this conversation with Iowa's offense as well. But I think they're in a much better spot. I don't think Tim Lester is going to come out there and all of a sudden Iowa's going to have the greatest show on turf. But if they're a top 100 offense, I think they're pretty well positioned because that defense with Phil Parker is going to be good. So it's just about being complementary to that, or more complementary to that. And I think Iowa stands a chance to be that this year and moving forward as long as Tim Lester's there.
Number 4 on our list is Travis Hunter, the cornerback and receiver from Colorado, the two-way player. And there's always going to be interest in Colorado and perhaps controversy around Colorado while Deion Sanders is there and trying to reestablish his program. But I think Travis Hunter is just going to play ball. And so whether Colorado has a great season or a really disappointing season, I think Travis Hunter is going to be Travis Hunter, and he might end up being like the shining light of a difficult Colorado season because this guy is awesome. And if they're better, then people are going to be watching Colorado and saying like, wow, could this guy wind up as a Heisman finalist? Shedeur Sanders is great too, but I think people are enamored by two-way play, and depending how much they use him on both sides of the ball, we're just going to talk about him, man.
Yeah, regardless of what happens, we'll talk about him. So I'm good with him being on this list. Can I throw another Colorado name at you that I thought about? And like, he would not be 4th on this list, and maybe even putting him top 20 doesn't quite make much sense. But Phil Lodeholt, their new offensive line coach, who had, this is his first full-time assistant job, was a little bit of an outside the box hire for Deion. I like the swing, but that's going to be the difference for Colorado. As long as Deion is there, they will get, I think, quarterbacks, and they will get skill. If they can start building along the offensive line in a meaningful way, which is to say that if Phil Lodeholt shows that he can get this group to gel in year 1, and then that makes it a more enticing situation for high school and transfers alike to go to Boulder, that to me would be pretty impactful for that program long term. So I understand maybe not wanting to put a position coach on a list like this, especially an offensive line coach, but I actually think that Phil Lodeholt might be the most important person in that program whose last name isn't Sanders.
I like it. That's really good. Number 3, Andy Kotelnicki, the new offensive coordinator at Penn State. Tim Lester with higher potential and higher stakes. Do you think Kotelnicki this high makes sense?
Yeah, I think so, because you're talking about elevating Penn State's ceiling, I think, which is like Penn State is already a very good program, tremendous defensive program. They've had consistency on that side of the ball over a couple different coordinators, but they've not been able to do that on the offensive side, and they need to if they want to be something more than they've been. Like I don't think Penn State wants to be like the team that just like is on the periphery of the playoff conversation. Sometimes we're in, sometimes we're out kind of thing. And the way you get past that is to be more explosive and creative offensively. And Andy Kotelnicki is the guy that has to get them there.
Number 2, Will Howard, the Ohio State quarterback. Is this the correct Ohio State representative on a list like this, or would you have gone with Ryan Day or Chip Kelly or Caleb Downs or Jeremiah Smith or somebody else?
I think I might have gone Chip Kelly. When you first laid this idea out to me, the name that I thought of immediately for Ohio State was Chip Kelly, because he is going to have a transformative impact on the way that Ohio State goes about its business this year. And I think goes about its business as long as he is the offensive coordinator. And I think that's going to be good. But it also, I think, in some ways runs a little counter to what Ryan Day has done in terms of being more of a passing forward offense and having that sort of be the identity of the program. So this would be a different Ohio State team. I think it's going to work, but there's a lot riding on Chip Kelly, I think, getting a somewhat new Ohio State offense kind of hitting the ground running this year to go teach a championship.
You okay with Howard, though? You want me to change it? Should I change it?
No, I think like Howard's interesting too. Will Howard apparently is like more polarizing than I realized. There's a lot of people out there talking about whether or not he's going to be good enough for Ohio State this year. Like I think he's going to be pretty good. I find his transfer to be one of the more interesting maybe over the last couple of years, when like he was I think a perfectly adequate, if not average, college quarterback who is now maybe expected to be something a little more, and how much can the weapons around him bring that out of him, I think is going to be really fun to watch.
And number 1, I think this is kind of obvious. It's Dan Lanning as the head coach at Oregon. Again, I guess you could go Dylan Gabriel or a player or somebody, but Dan Lanning has a chance to become the defining coach of the North. The idea that if Oregon is the defining team in the North and Georgia is the defining team in the South, and Dan Lanning used to be the defensive coordinator for Kirby Smart, if they somehow would meet up in the playoff for the national championship game, that would be a huge story. but I don't know that this is a huge talking point. He's 7-5 against top 25 teams in 2 years at Oregon. He's 0-3 against Washington and 1-1 against Oregon State. I don't know that we're going to dock him points because they got their doors blown off in his very first game when they played Georgia as the 2-time defending national champ in his first game as the Oregon head coach. But there's a lot expected of Oregon this year. I think there's a lot of conversation around Ryan Day not winning big games. Mm-hmm. There's been some big games that Oregon has not. I mean, they only lost twice last year. If they beat Washington the second time, Oregon might have won a national title, and they couldn't do it. They lost to their rival twice. So I think Dan Lanning is a really good head coach. I think he has really built an interesting culture there. And as much as he went after Deion Sanders for being all about the sizzle, Dan Lanning's got some sizzle too. They also have a lot of substance, but he's not only here because it's a sure thing. He's the awesome coach of an awesome team. They have an awesome team. They have a chance to win it all, but also, right? They need to play their best in their biggest games. And only 2 years in, they haven't always done that.
Yeah, you get kind of two sides of the coin here with Dan Lanning, which is why I agree with him being number one. Because I think he does have to prove it. He's been very good to this point, but I think he has to prove that he can get to something greater than what Oregon has been. And those expectations are on this program this year. But if he does, he's college football's new heel, I think, if he does.
Absolutely. I mean, he's
right.
He is absolutely going to be a dominant force on and off the field because, as you said, he's clearly kind of embraced what they're doing. And I also think he thinks Oregon can do everything they need to do. And I think there will be an undercurrent of speculation of, will he wind up going back to the South at some point? He's not really a son of the South. I mean, he definitely could stay at Oregon for the long term, but yeah, he's got it coming and going. This is ball and beyond with Dan Lanning, and they have a chance to be awesome.
Yeah.
That's our list. 20 through 1. You talked about Chip Kelly. You talked about Phil Lodeholt. What other glaring omissions did you find on this list? And again, we want to do this on this show. A lot of times Bill and I collaborate before the show. We want to do a little bit more of, here's my list, Bill rips me. Here's Bill's list, I rip him. So rip me.
Yeah. I don't know that there were any glaring omissions, right? There are certainly some high caliber, well-known players that aren't here, but you don't want the list to be 20 players either. So I get that. I think you maybe could have put Cade Bell, the new Pitt offensive coordinator, on here. Cause I think that's a situation where if it doesn't work, Pat Narduzzi is looking for a job. And I'm not saying after this year, but I think that is a mighty big swing and a transition for a Pitt offense that I'm excited about, but it's not a slam dunk that it's going to work. And if it doesn't work, I think Pitt's going in a new direction. Maybe
really. I mean, again, Pitt won 20 games the previous two. They would have had bad year last year, but they've been good. They've been good. Pat Narduzzi.
They have been good. But if you're looking at another year where they don't make a bowl game, which I think is possible, and there's not a whole lot of progress with that offense, then I think 2025 is a little uncomfortable.
I do think I think they will be given. There might be some bumps with an offense this new and trying to get it to click, and especially if Holstein winds up playing, he's new too. Mm-hmm. I think there might be some reasonable bumps that will be allowed because you think there's something at the end of the tunnel in 25.
Could be. Quite possibly. I had Riley Leonard. You talked about him when you talked about Marcus Freeman. The only other, it's more of an idea than it is a specific person, but I did come up with a person. It's guys who are running personnel departments.
Oh yeah, that's really good.
The one that I landed on was Michael Doctor, who is Michigan State's director of recruiting and player relations. He was at Oregon State with Jonathan Smith. Jonathan Smith got there in 2021, kind of right around the time where that program started to turn the corner, and I think they won 10 games that year, and then won 8 or 9 games the last couple of years. It just seems like he and Jonathan Smith are kind of in lockstep with what they want and how to build a program. And I think a lot of that actually is translatable from Oregon State to Michigan State to get Michigan State back to being somewhat relevant in the Big Ten. So I think there are a couple other personnel people you could have put there, but I thought that situation at Michigan State was one that was perhaps the most interesting. So maybe a guy like Michael Doctor could have been on the list.
That's really good. And again, I went to the Personnel and Recruiting Symposium in Nashville. I talked about it on our show a couple of weeks ago, the show that was talked about Nebraska, Colorado at the top. I thought a lot of interesting information to glean there. But again, like Courtney Morgan, who had been the personnel guy at Washington, with Kalen DeBoer getting almost $1 million at Alabama. Like these people are gaining importance. They're gaining value within college football programs, and they're gaining some cash. And so that's probably an oversight by me to not have somebody like that represented, because they are so paramount to like the future of college football, how things work now. They're the GMs. So if you're doing an NFL list, you'd have some quarterbacks, you'd have some head coaches, you'd have some coordinators, but you'd probably get a GM in there too. And so that's a really good point by you. All right. Last break. When we come back, we'll do quickly 5 Southern villains who could maybe hold the North back in 2024. And then we'll tell you what we're doing on tomorrow's Kings of the North. All of that next on KOTN. Back on Kings of the North, Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. We want to run through 5 Southern villains, Landis, in a similar way. Probably actually hold off on the Big Ten tiebreaker talk. We know they did it. I don't think there's any surprises in there, but we need to like work through exactly. It's one of those things. You do the tiebreakers. It's like, all right, well, if they're tied, they're also probably tied at number 1 in the first tie. They're probably tied the second tiebreaker. They're probably tied the third tiebreaker. So it's the 4th tiebreaker that always matters. We'll digest that a little bit more for tomorrow. We'll also tell you that tomorrow, Dan Wetzel from the College Football Enquirer will join us. I think we're going to reveal our preseason All-North team, Bill. Is that correct? And that is built by you, and then I'll criticize your list.
It is built by me. It is done. I have to double check maybe 1 or 2 things, but I think we're ready to roll with it. Yeah.
And then I will have my overrated Southern team of the week, which will be a regular Tuesday hit for us, where we kind of remind everybody that the South often isn't quite as good. The point is not that the South is not good at football. The point is the South often isn't as good as the perception of it is. So we'll have the overrated Southern team of the week. And then we'll have 3 guests. A North Dakota State person talking about North Dakota State versus Colorado on Thursday. We'll have a Minnesota person talking about Minnesota, North Carolina on Thursday. And we'll have a West Virginia person talking about our biggest Northern game of the week, which is West Virginia, Penn State on Saturday. But let's run through our 5 Southern villains. I thought of this in a similar way to the 20 most important people in the North, but it's who in the South can stop the North. Who in the South should Northern people be aware of, because it might be a problem. Do you understand what I'm saying here, Bill?
Yeah.
All right. Number 5 on this list is Mike Gundy, the Oklahoma State head coach. Number 4 is the Grove Collective, which is the NIL army at Ole Miss. And they got a lot done this offseason. Number 3 is another combo. It's Blake Baker, the new LSU defensive coordinator, and Colin Klein, the new Texas A&M offensive coordinator. Both those programs looked at least a little bit north. Blake Baker is from Missouri. Colin Klein is from Kansas State, which, again, is nothing new. When the South gets in trouble, they look up. They don't look sideways, and they don't look down. They look up, right? They look up and say, please help us. But they're not looking to the heavens. They're looking to the north, because that's where they go find football acumen. Number 2, obvious, Quinn Ewers, the quarterback at Texas. And number 1, even more obvious, Kirby Smart, the head coach at Georgia. Gundy, the Grove Collective, Baker and Klein, Ewers, and Smart. What do you think of my 5 Southern villains? Sports villains, football villains, not bad people, but people who might be so good at their job, they can negatively impact Northern teams.
I like the list. I am surprised that Kalen DeBoer is not on here. And I think I might actually have Kalen DeBoer number 1.
Number one, because he is of the North in every single way possible. Son
And
of the
spurned.
Dakotas.
Yeah.
Head coach at Washington and bailed.
Yeah. And bailed. And like, I think Alabama's going to be good. I think Alabama might end up being the most threatening SEC team when we're talking about teams for national championships. He left Washington in a really tough spot. He took a bunch of good Northern players with him. Parker Brailsford, Jeremy Bernard from Washington.
Oh, I'm
Caden
mad. Now
Proctor.
you're getting me mad. Why did I have him on the list? I'm so mad at him now. You're right.
Caden Proctor is supposed to be at Iowa. Now he's back at Alabama with Kalen DeBoer. Keon Sabb, who was going to start at Michigan, left Michigan to go to Alabama. They also play Wisconsin this year. Kalen DeBoer is checking a lot of boxes, man. I think he should have been on this list.
The Grove Collective, Ole Miss got like 18 transfers in the offseason, including Walter Nolan, a defensive tackle who was like the number one recruit in the country. And the thing that like Nick Saban and everybody has said about Ole Miss is like now up front, they look like a team that can compete at the top of the SEC. That really matters. The reason I have Mike Gundy on here is because when you look at the top 7 teams in the predicted Big 12 standings, 5 of them of the 7 are our Northern team. Oklahoma State is the highest rated South team in the Big 12. I think if a Northern team doesn't win the Big 12, I think it'll be Oklahoma State. So that's why he's on this list for me.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I would maybe throw UCF in there too, or if you want to do Mike Gundy and Gus Malzahn. UCF does not play either Kansas school. It does not play Oklahoma State. It does play like 3 of the 4 worst teams in the conference in BYU, Arizona State, and Cincinnati. And it plays Arizona, West Virginia, and Utah all at home. And they have similar odds to Oklahoma State to win the Big 12. Like I find UCF potentially sort of like equally as dangerous maybe as Oklahoma State. So I'm fine with Oklahoma State being there. I might have just combined them with UCF.
Blake Baker, like Brian Kelly basically got rid of everybody who coached defense at LSU last year and said, we need to get better at this. It's when you have a lopsided program, it's not dissimilar to Penn State or Iowa, which it was just lopsided the other way. You try to fix things. Colin Klein is like a Kansas State guy through and through, quarterback at Kansas State, had coached, I think, for 9 years at Kansas State and just got stolen by Texas A&M, which also stole the Nebraska AD who had played at Nebraska. So sometimes like you're of the North until the South cash comes through, right? Like that is, we are aware of that reality in every way that it applies.
Right. That's right. Yeah. I like both those picks. Actually, Blake Baker to me feels like if we look up at the end of the college football season and ask who was the most impactful coordinator hire, I think there's a solid chance it's Blake Baker. That was a really good hire. I'm a little mad LSU got him.
I thought LSU was sort of overrated last year because they were like a big stat offense that like didn't really do anything that mattered. And then I had my fantasy football draft on Sunday night, and I wound up with Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas Jr. And I reunited the entire LSU offense on my fantasy football team. And I was like, why? Why did I do this? Have I I'm just like Colin Klein and Trev Alberts. I betrayed the North in the pursuit of money. I was like, I just want to win my fantasy football league. Let me take all these Tigers. I'm a terrible person. All right. That's it for our first live show on Kings of the North. We will do this every Monday, every Tuesday, every Wednesday, every Thursday, Saturday nights at 11 p.m. Landis and I will be there for an hour to recap the most interesting stuff that happened in all of college football through a Northern lens. Friday mornings, me and Tyler Shoemaker talking about college football betting, and we're betting $5,000 of our company's own money, real money. If we're terrible, we're going to give at least $5,000 to a charity. If we're good, we're going to give all the money we earn, hopefully much more than $5,000. Maybe $5,100 to a charity. So that'll make that, we hopefully make that Friday morning show like have some real stakes. But Landis, I'm so excited to be doing it. I hope you had fun, man. This is your life now.
It is my life now. I had a blast. No, this was great. I think a good intro for people who have not been with us. And I'm excited about where we're going. And I'm very, very excited that we have games to talk about this week.
Yeah. We've been doing a lot of talking with no games. And I will just for people who are looking for it, there certainly will be more moments on future shows where we tell the South to cram it. We didn't tell the South to cram it a ton on this show. It's not the number one thing we're going to do, but it's the number 2 thing we're going to do. Number 1 is celebrate and analyze and contextualize the North. And number 2 is tell the South to cram it. Thanks to our producer, Mike Urostowski, for making us look good and sound good and really just building this thing from the bottom up. Thanks to everybody who has been here for the past year and is like, oh, yeah, these guys are going live now. Let me check it out. I've been around. And everybody who was like, what? What is this thing? And you just dropped in here. We couldn't be happier to have you. And we're really excited to talk Northern college football and national football from a Northern lens this entire football season. He's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises. And for the first time live in this new world, that was Kings of the North.